1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Yes, no? Sweet. Okay, great. For those of you that are here to listen to the talk, I encourage you to move as close as you can to the front. I'm going to be doing a lot of coding examples, and it's going to be very it may be very difficult for you to see towards the back. So it's up to you as far as where you sit at. So welcome. What I'm going to be covering today is internationalization as well as localization, because one without the other, kind of the purpose is defeated. And my name is Ben. I'm a developer advocate for IBM Bluemix, which is a platform as a service similar to Azure, Heroku, what have you, but has some unique offerings and services that kind of separate it, but it does have a lot of the same runtimes, containers, virtual machines, etc., that you're going to get, with most any platform as a service. So what I'm going to be talking about today is internationalization, which has a short acronym, I think, maybe, for I-18N. Excuse me. So internationalization is the process of developing products in such a way that they can be localized for languages and cultures easily. For application developers, which is most likely everyone here in the room, internationalizing an application means abstracting all the strings and other locale-specific bits, such as date or currency formats, out of the application. And so I'll just open up a browser here, head to Amazon, and to give you an example what this would look like is, stay at Amazon. Okay, you'll see here that as you check out the page, let me click on a Cyber Monday deal, and we'll check out this really sweet racer. So this is delivered in English, which is probably the most common language, but what if someone in the Czech Republic was looking at this and they wanted to see this web page in Czech? What a application developer at Amazon would do is would go through, let me blow this up a little bit, make it a little bit easier to see. And they would take all the text, so such as this title right here, the currency here, this information that's right here, and everything all throughout, as well as numbers for quantity, things like 2.5. If you, a lot of languages, especially European languages, will have a comma instead of a decimal point in that place. And so you'd abstract all of those snippets of text, strings and numbers, and then process them based upon the language that was requested along with the web page. A bad thing to do, and if you want to get really, really difficult when it comes to application development, you want to embed text inside of images, and you want to be friendly to international crowd or multiple languages, especially if, for example, if you're developing applications for Americans, then you're pretty much set, English, period, you're done. But if you're developing, for example, in Europe, in which, for example, I was talking to a developer from Belgium, and he was required to develop applications with Dutch, French, and English. And if you think about the size of Belgium, it's like smaller than the size of Florida. And that doesn't include Spain for Spanish and Italian and German and all other languages that are within just a couple 100-mile radius. And so if you're an application developer in Europe or something like that, you really have to keep this in mind. And by embedding text in an image, that makes it a poor user experience, which we'll get into a little bit later. But internationalization would be grabbing out these snippets right here that can or should be translated so that way your user can understand them in their native language and culture. So localization, which has an acronym of L10N, is a process of adapting applications and text to enable their usability in a particular cultural or linguistic market. And localizing an application means providing translations and localized formats for those abstracted bits. So I'm going to give you an example of what this looks like, and this is also using the library that I'm going to do some examples in today. So FormatJs, this was created and released open source by Yahoo, And what this does is, let me see if I can blow this up. There's a very simple example on the front that will kind of drive this message home. So let's say that you've got a social media website, and someone shares that they've taken 1,000 photos on December 5th of 2015. Well, let's say that somebody from, let's go with France, visits that social media page, and that social media site or that application wants to deliver that content in a localized, friendly version for that user. So if I switch to France, you see not only does the language change, but also, for example, the way that the date right here is delivered. In English, it would be December 5th, 2015, whereas in French, the day is delivered before the month and then the year. And then also, you'll see here for 1,000, instead of having a comma in French, there's actually a space. And let's look at a different language. Let's go with Japanese. I don't really know what to tell you here, but I imagine you can see the differences there. If I look at Portuguese or Brazil, you can see that there can be quite a difference here when it comes to the date, and then for the number, right here in this case, 1,000, it's actually got a period. So this can become very complex if, let's say, you're working on a product such as Google or something like that, and you want to be friendly to as many languages as possible because your product is going to be launched into multiple different areas, then this is really important. This can be also enormously cumbersome if, let's say, you've got hundreds or thousands of pages in order to do this with. Doing custom strings, which is one way of doing this per page. Like if I go to my Amazon, if you can imagine doing a custom string entry for each of these snippets, right here you'd go absolutely crazy. And so therefore, having a tool that can help you do this, Yahoo created this, format.js, and then they open sourced it for our benefit, so that it makes it a lot easier in order for you to do that. So in ECMAScript, internationalization was added to the spec in December of 2012. So built right into the native JavaScript without using any framework, library, what have you, you can, by grabbing the language of the browser, so if you've got a computer open, if you just go to the web console, see if I can blow this up here. I'll clear this out. If you type, it's under the window object, so you can type window if you want to, but navigator.language for WebKit. And what you'll get is, in this case, English US, because my browser is set up for English US. And so what you can do with JavaScript is you can grab that, and then whenever you want to format a date or a number or what have you, then ECMAScript can grab your date or your number or what have you, and then process it based on this spec right here, which is blown up here. Let me see if I can find an example here. Unfortunately, ECMAScript, their spec just provides like a lot of theory, but it doesn't like ever really have like a code example, and that can make it really difficult to. I don't know if there's any people on the committee here, but hint, hint. If you could throw us a bone somehow, and so instead of having to read through all of this, I forget where you can see the size of this document is enormous. But there are methods. I'm sorry, I can't find them right here. But there are methods in which you can translate like a date or a number or what have you very easily without using a third-party library in order to do that. But there is an issue, unfortunately, with the compatibility of this because, well, I guess you can't see very well. Let me open the actual source page. So on Can I Use, you can see in the internationalization API that is from 2012, you can see there's some glaring holes here. Internet Explorer, it depends on what you're supporting, but for Internet Explorer 8, 9, and 10, it's not supported at all. You can see here, it looks like we've only got 1%, 1%, 1%. But this is the big hole right here, which is Safari and iOS Safari. So we've got here not an enormous amount iOS Safari 9.1's got 5%. But depending upon your market, especially if you're going towards developers, a lot of developers use Apple. And Safari might be a browser to use, most especially for iPhones. That's enormous. Mobile views, I think, crested already 50% of web page views out there. And so depending upon the product that you're creating, if you're creating a web app that needs to be internationalized and localized for the people that are viewing it, and you're relying on that native support, this is missing from these browsers. I have no idea why a standard from almost 4 years ago has not been implemented in these browsers. Chrome, though, and Firefox, as well as the latest version of Internet Explorer, does support that. So you do have that caveat to work with. So the importance of internationalization, I've shown you a little bit of an example here with Amazon, but partial or complete exclusion of internationalization severely affects your user's experience with the product, and I'll give you an example right here. This is Trenitalia, which is a train service in Italy. I was there about a month or two ago, and this is the train service that goes all throughout Italy. And what you can see here is that, let me see here. That's a really nice feature. I don't know if you saw that bar there. I'm going to get to that. But let's say that you've got someone from Germany that wants to take a train in Italy. If this site did not offer translations, then options could be incredibly limited. Now, you can use something like Babelfish. So if you go to Google Translate or Babelfish and then insert the web page that way, then you can see the translation. But as you progress through the checkout, and as you progress through pages, then you start having issues with cookies and other things like that for session persistence. And so you can get all the way through to a purchase page. And then because of the way that the web page is kind of being rendered inside of Babelfish or Google Translate or what have you, it's just not a situation to work unless you just have a text page. And also, too, like I pointed out, all of these images right here, like you can see up here, I've got a drop down here, got Italiano. If I go to French, the images, let me go to English here. The images, in this case, this is a surprise to me. This wasn't working. This wasn't the case yesterday. But in this case, the images with the text that is flattened right into the image changes. If that is not the case, then even though you might have text that is translated, having an image with text on it that isn't translated can result in a lot of bounces and people not being able to use your product at all. There is an option here. Let me see if I can get it to pop up again. Hopefully y'all can see this. In Google Chrome, this is a great option where you can translate a page, especially if you're visiting pages. For example, government pages are terrible at this. Like I was visiting a page for the United Arab Emirates, which is in Arabic, and they don't have a natural translation. So without this, I would have been really, really up a creek. And what Google Chrome does is recognizes the language that my browser uses, which in this case is English, and then allows me to translate right here within the page all the text strings that it recognizes. And it will also properly translate dates, numbers, things like that, currencies for me, and it does that right within the browser. This is an enormous tool. This is not something that's available in other browsers, but it's a great tool that is available. You shouldn't rely upon it, but this is something that will allow you to do that. Exclusion of internationalization makes your product inaccessible to non-locale users. This is an Israeli news website. And so you can see right here, notice something when it comes to internationalization. This is important for CSS and page layout. Hebrew is a right-to-left text, so is Arabic, Farsi, etc., whereas English, German, French, Italian, etc. is left to right. And so when you're developing your product, getting the user agent's language should change the CSS that you deliver, the page format that you deliver, and as well as the text as well. This topic is absolutely enormous, and I can't give an example of every thing to consider. But in this page, you can see there's no option anywhere. And if someone can read Hebrew and point it out to me, then please do. But you can see that there's no option to change languages here. And so if you're reading a story, for example, last year in July, I was planning to travel to Israel. My trip got canceled because of the rocket fire. And as I'm trying to find out information, up-to-date information on the security situation there, these are the kind of websites that I had to deal with. And thankfully with Google Chrome, that gives me an option here, is the text of the page is in Hebrew and it'll translate it for me so I can get the information that I need. But you also see from a user experience standpoint, this is aligned right to left. And so this may not be an issue with, let's click on this page right here. This may not be an issue with just a snippet of text. And you can also too see as I transition pages. Oh, there we go. Great. You can see here, this creates readability. If I'm reading this from an English language perspective, having it go from from right to left is going to create issues for me tracking line by line as I go down. And so there are important things to keep in mind and consider as you're trying to make your website compatible for those users. So what I'm going to focus on for the remainder of this time is implementing format.js. I'm going to try and stay as framework and tool agnostic as possible as I deliver this information because depending upon your stack, you might be using Ember.js or Angular, what have you, for front-end templating. You might be using Dust.js on the back end for back-end templates, or maybe you're super cool and you're using Ember on the front end and the back end, or you're using React or what have you in the front or back end, but the principles shouldn't matter. The basic steps when it comes to internationalization is that first you extract the text snippets that require translation via some templating tool. So I created a very simple page, looks like this, in which I have a date, time, number, percentage, and currency. So these are common things that are going to change based upon someone's locale and the format. It's not just necessarily going to be the translation of that text from like December to December, for French. It's going to be also the change in the way in which the date, the day is going to go before the month format. And I'm going to pull up my code here. And I hope everyone can see it. In my page here for internationalization, the first step is that I'm grabbing, in this case, I'm using handlebars, which is like a very bare bones basic, very similar to Mustache JS templates, and it grabs the information here that I want to translate, and based upon the user's language, it will translate it for me. So I've got all the fields right here, which will go back to the browser. I've got my fields right here, and I'm going to extract those out with some sort of templating in order to make them available for translation to use for some service. The next step is to set up detection for the script for the user's language. And so down here, you can see I'm doing this on the front end to begin with. And so this is pretty simple to do detection. You don't have to worry about like grabbing HTML headers or what have you. The accept language parameter in a HTML header will tell you what the language is going to be. And I'm going to detect that and grab that into a variable so that way as I'm processing through my data down here, I grab it for the correct language. And then when it comes to, let me pull up my server file right here. When it comes to doing it on server side, then that can be grabbed in the request header. So I'm using Express here. But the request, the header, and then the accept language header that comes across will tell you what languages are accepted by, or desired to be accepted by that website. And then for each request, you want to process and deliver the correct localized strings based on the user's language. And so to walk through this, well, first what I'll do is show you the format.js website. They did a really nice job of putting this together. It's always nice when the website for a framework puts some aesthetically pleasing stuff together. But for format.js, there are 4 integrations that they have done automatically for you. That makes it easy if you use one of these languages to pick it up. Dust.js is from LinkedIn. And this would be all server-side rendering to my knowledge. It does talk here about browser-based, and I have never used. Does anyone in here use Dust.js in the browser? Okay, does it exist in the browser now, or has it always? Oh, wow, okay, I'm sorry. I have always used it on the server side. So there you go, cool. There's handlebars, which is most naturally designed for in the browser, but it can also be rendered runtime in the server. Ember.js as well as React are libraries that can run on server and front end. I would recommend front end. It can get to be kind of tricky depending upon your implementation, but if you are doing server-side rendering, every time that you're going to change a language, you've got to resubmit the website to the server, have it process and return it, depending upon somebody's connection, especially in developing areas, for example, like India, where the bandwidth is severely choked by the fact there's a billion people, or not a billion, but roughly about 500 million that are trying to access the internet. That can take 3, 4, 5 seconds per page. You can also persist it if you're really awesome with a cookie, a token, or something like that, that every time it submits, that it'll recognize, hey, this user wants French, or something like that. But front end is going to be much quicker in order for you just to change the strings that are on there instead of processing the page on the back. So with using handlebars, how many people have used handlebars in here? Okay, great. So it's a very, very, very simple format. Here would be, right here, an example of that is using 2 curly braces on each side and then having some denotation of the variable. In this case, this is price, but there's also some other parameters in here, such as format and number, which this is going to tell our library, you can see it right here, oops, yeah, there we go, right there, to format a number for us. And then we want to add currency to that, so this is not just a number, but this is going to be the price of something, and then the currency to put that into. And then we have our information that handlebars is going to use to render it. So in this case, our locale is going to be US. The context for our template, the price variable right here is going to be $1,000. And then this is going to be the built-in handlebars method of template, in which it's going to accept a parameter or an argument for our context, which is our data right here, and then it processes it with this international plugin, which if you come right here, you'll see you'll import handlebars onto your page, and then add the internationalization special sauce on top of that for you to render it. And then if you decide to do front end only, then you need to import the language, in this case French, which I built my app using English and French. So you can include 5, 10, 15, what have you languages. The great part about doing this server side, if you decide to do that, is as it says here in Node.js, the NPM package, the data for all 150 plus languages is preloaded and does not need to be loaded manually. So that can add a lot of overhead if you're doing a site like Google, which is going to have pretty much every language available in it. Then front end would likely not be the way to go on that. Or you could possibly include like the top 10 languages, and if that doesn't work, then you can do an AJAX call to grab that script library from the server and then bring it back. Depends on how you want to do that. So once I grab that information here on my page, let me pull this up. Right here, so I've got my handlebars library, my international library, and then I imported the French library to show that the different language support. And then let me uncomment this. There's a polyfill called international.js that is necessary for Safari support. So if you're going to use this, even if you're using handlebars, this library right here, you're going to need to include this for Safari in order for that polyfill to work. If there's anyone here that works for Apple or Safari, then please close that hole for us. And then I just included jQuery here. This is not a requirement, but I just included for the sake of making it easier to do DOM manipulation as we're doing this. So as my script runs, so I need to load all these scripts ahead of time. prior to execution of my code. I need to make sure that with handlebars that I am registering this international library so that way when it's processing those templates, it's picking up these things like formatted date, formatted time. You can see here my variable that I'm going to grab from my JSON document is right here. So date, time, number, percentage, price, etc. That it needs to know to pick up what these things are, and then also these parameters I'm passing in, like day, month, year, etc. There's tons of different options you can use to customize your page to how you want it to look. And so once I register that, I threw in a document.ready function, which waits for the whole page to be loaded, and then it grabs our language, which actually this is, Navigator is not on the top view, it's actually window.navigator, but you can just go with Navigator, it works anyways. And then I've got a fallback here, a logic check that if I'm only supporting English and French in this case, and if it does not return navigator.language, either returns undefined or doesn't have English or French there, I'm going to deliver them English because it's going to be the most popular. Now here, what you could do also, be a smarter idea from user experience, is have a pop-up that says, would you like to use Babelfish or Google Translate, or have some other option so that way your user isn't stuck with that language. And then I'm firing off a function that I created down here with the browser language that was detected. And so I'm going to grab my handlebars content, which if you're not familiar with handlebars, seems that most people are. Handlebars executes in a script tag that has this specific type attached to it, text /x/handlebars/template. And so if it's not within there, whenever this renders, all of this is going to be rendered as HTML, and it's not going to be able to be read by handlebars. Now, if you're familiar, now a lot of you have probably used Angular, or you've used whatever it's called, Ember, and that has automatic tag detection, but with handlebars that is not the case. And so I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to compile it, which this does is this reads this into the handlebar library, and it grabs the snippet tags that it needs. In this case, my locale, or the language that I'm going to grab is right from up here in the navigator.language. And then here's my context. So on this page, let's say that this was the information on a product in a product catalog. I've got the price, how many we've got in stock, maybe the percentage of sales versus not, something like that. And then the date and the time stamp to show the difference when it comes to the different language formats. And then I'm going to use the native method for handlebars of template, drop in that data that I just showed you, and then I'm going to replace it with the HTML. This is, I'm going to take the rendered HTML that handlebars gave me and drop it in. This is definitely a no-no when it comes to replacing nodes. So like you read in a node, you edit it and you override it. This can throw you all sorts of issues, but I'm just, for the sake of just simplicity and showing it to you, that's what it would look like. So once I've got all of that done, I've also got two buttons up here that will allow me, you can see them right here, that I can manually change the locale from US English and French if I'd like to. So once I load that up, right here, so you can see this is probably familiar to everyone here in the room. Date, time, number, percentage, and currency are all the way that we naturally would think. But when I'm going to click on the French button, what this will do is it will nicely translate this. Not only, in this case, it will actually translate the name of the month, but will also translate the format in which the date should be. You'll notice that the date here for this number is actually day first, not month first, like it would be in English. For the number, this 47,000 is a space now and there. Percentage is pretty much the same. I think in English, it'll be, the percentage will be right there. In French, I guess there's a space. And then for currency, there's a space in between right there. And I guess they add on the cents right there with a comma. And the US currency, which in the English language, that currency would go ahead of it right there. And so this is incredibly useful if you're doing a shopping website or something like that that's got thousands of different products. This will do that for you. And then also within here, I'll show you through the API here, You can also do more powerful things such as, for example, yesterday, today, etc. I'll switch this to French. And this will also translate common text. This does not include entire French dictionary in it. Or you've got other options here of like Japanese or Portuguese for Brazil that it includes common phrases such as yesterday, December, etc. for you to use. And then any string, such as here on my Amazon website, my product information about my Fisher-Price Power Wheels Dune Racer, this would need to be text that you manually insert or translate for you. But FormatJS does a great job, and I'll scroll down here to give you an example. This allows pluralization with text. So in this case, we've got Annie took 1,000 photos on December 5th. And if I translate this to French, you'll see that it will translate this string of text for me. And what it does is it correctly puts, because each language is going to have, sometimes noun before the verb instead of the verb before the noun. Or they're going to have different ways on how they affect nouns, pronouns, descriptive adjectives. And what this will do is this will do this for you. You can see you can kind of get, this is the language in which it would look like. So this can get a bit tricky when it comes to coding this in, but this is a library that can help you do some simple text translations right there without having to use any third-party translation at all. If you're on a government website or healthcare or something that the details are incredibly important, then I wouldn't rely on something like this. But if the details are not, dependent upon something very important, then this is a service that you can use. And here's another example right here with more complex transformation right here. And it does a very, very good job of those things. The probably best way of using this is a front-end manipulation with back-end rendering in the case of having a site that's got multiple different languages it needs to support. So there is a server-side version of this, which... It's pretty simple in order to implement this. I've chosen to, in this case, I'm using Node.js, and we have our handlebars library, which this is the same front-end library that you'd see on the browser side page. And this is the Handlebars International library. And the code is going to be pretty similar as well. And then I'm including the file system module in order to read in a file here. So whenever I launch up the server and go to the root directory, what I'm going to do here, this is important, this is how I'm going to detect the language, because this code is not running in someone's browser. And so I'm going to need to grab that out of the header that is sent to see what language. And so if I'm just going to comment this out just to show you. Oop, I'll just grab this right here. For you to see what this looks like when it gets spit out. Oh, what is this? 36, 36, oh. There we go. Okay, great. I'm going to go localhost. And then when I do that, you probably can't see very well at all. We can see right here, English US, which is being sent from my browser, is sent in that request header. And then the more simple version of that, just English, because there's English Great Britain, English US, etc., that will have different ways of pronouncing. For example, color. C-O-L-O-R in Great Britain English is C-O-L-O-U-R. And so that can make some difference in some cases. And so once I grab that, I can then just run it through basically the same code that I did before. So I'm using the file system here to grab my server file. Now this is not built with scalability in mind. It's just a simple example. But what I'll do here is grab the HTML from my server file right here. So here's my HTML file, and I pulled out all that JavaScript that I was at the bottom. If I pull up browser.js, you'll see all this logic and script tags are here. I'm just pulling all this out and doing it server side. and you see that it's missing there. And then I'm able to just basically take the same exact JavaScript and run it through here, and then just send that result. So I read in the HTML, I'm going to send it back in a response, and then it will have the updated information there. I didn't have time to add in an option to change the language manually, like I showed you on that button. If I pull that up right here to go back and forth like this. And obviously this is not scalable. You'd have to write this for each individual page. But whenever that is run, then it will spit out the same information without having any logic on the front end. So let's close that up. We've got like 3 minutes left. I encourage you to check out, if you got your laptop open, check out format.js. And kind of click around and you can see the integrations. They did a really, really good job, and this is supported by Yahoo. And so you've got a strong professional development team behind this. And you also know that it's been tested because Yahoo's in like 170 countries. And so you know that they've tested it well. And this can be a really quick way for you to, in this case, creating some React components that will then spit out, in this case, the currency back to you. You can implement this in probably 10-15 minutes for just a basic page, and then you can make your site very quickly internationally friendly. And that can make an enormous difference when it comes to user experience. And something I didn't harp on too much when it comes to accessibility is that we should be designing for a web that's inclusive. And if you don't have internationalization, even the most basic support of it, then there are users that you are excluding from using your product or service that otherwise, in this case, can be done quite easily depending upon the framework or tool that you use. So that's just about it. I'll be up here for the next session starts in like 5 minutes. I'll be around here if you have any questions or anything. Thanks for coming. Hope you learned a lot, and have a great conference.